Seems like we are live and we are online. Hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Time zones, right? Remind me who invited those? I guess you are mostly based in US. I don't know. I'm based in Poland. So I would say in my case it's late afternoon or even an early evening because it's 9 p.m. right now in here. So this is Tanzu, and I would like you to remind you that this is our weekly show, which runs every Wednesday, 12 Pacific time, which by the way is 9 p.m. in Poland. My name is Jakub and I'm very happy to be here today and be able to speak about testing your messaging application or your application that takes advantage of messaging based communication with Spring ecosystem. All right. So we are going to see a lot of code today, which means I hope the demo gods are with us today because I don't have any backup plan if something goes wrong. If anything goes wrong, hopefully demo gods are with us tonight. So let's get it started. Let's imagine this kind of an architecture. Typical architecture where you have some UI layer with some controller. You have some services like application services that allows you, one of those allows you to apply for a card. And then you have a card entity. You have the repo and of course the database. Plus there is some domain event publisher or integration event publisher, which publishes events to some sort of a message broker. In this case, let's choose RabbitMQ for instance, and we have a bunch of other applications. Like for now, just one of those, it's client notification, which subscribes to some messages and tries to do something with those. And during this live coding session, we are going to connect two applications and then we are going to try to test whether the connection actually works. So we are going to use mainly Spring tools like Spring Boot, Spring Cloud Stream, Spring Cloud Contract, but also on top of that, very nice and very, I would say, well-known tools like jUnit, Spock framework, or Mockito. So many tools during this more or less half of hour of live coding. So let's imagine we have this architecture and we have a new feature. And the new business requirement is as follows. Every time a card is granted or a card application gets rejected, we get a notification. By we, I mean clients. So I either get a notification saying, hey, you got a card, congratulations, here's how to use it. Or maybe I get a nice email saying, you know what, this time we couldn't grant you this card, but next month maybe we will be able to do so. So very simple, I would say very simple business requirement. I would like to publish some integration events from the left side to the right side, and I would like to test that. So sleeves up and let's see how the current situation looks like when it comes to our implementation, when it comes to code. So this is my very simple Spring Boot application, and I would say some test speaks perfectly and shows more than 1,000 words or 1,000 lines of production code. So this is an end-to-end test, or even two of those, which allow me to see the two basic flows in our application. So the basic two features I have. Some would argue that this is one feature, like applying for a card with two different resolutions. Yes, we can stick to that definition too. Anyways, we have a Spring Boot test which bootstrap the whole context, the entire context, probably with some in-memory database too, like H2. We have the credit card controller, and we just check whether I can apply for a card. I pass my identification number as a client, and in this case I got 200 something, which means I got a card. In this case I got 403 probably, which means, hey, this time we couldn't give you, or we couldn't grant you a card, and let's see if those tests they actually work. By the way, every now and then I have some problems with my IDE. I figured out today, probably wrong mixture of new IntelliJ with new Java. I haven't figured out yet, so if my IDE crashes, I would have to restart that. Hopefully that won't happen tonight. Those tests are green, so let's take a look what's going on inside. So if I go here, I have a very simple controller, REST controller / applications. I apply for a card, I pass the request body, and I delegate the whole work, the entire work, to my application service, which is called apply for card service. And it gives me an optional result, the result being the credit card. If I get it, I map it to 200 OK, otherwise I map it to 403. As simple as that. Let's see what's going on underneath. So here we have our very sophisticated risk checking algorithm, which says, hey, if the client was born before 70s, then they don't get a card. Otherwise, they get a card with default limit, we save it back to the database, and we return it. As simple as that. This identification number, that's an identification number we use in Poland. It's called PESEL, and PESEL, two first digits of our PESEL, they indicate that they stand for the year in which the client was born in. So if that was less than 70, probably we shouldn't be granting the card, because the client, they weren't born before, after or in 70s. Sophistication, very great risk checking algorithm, right? By the way, the identification number, which is called PESEL, it's supposed to be unique. By definition, if it's an identification number, it should be unique. We had some situations in Poland where two different persons, they got the same PESEL. Imagine you use this PESEL as, for instance, your identification in your software in a hospital. You deploy that to a hospital. If you do that mistake and you are unlucky enough to get two different people with the same PESEL, probably you might get and run into some problems. Who is going to get that medicine? Who is going to get that injection? Both of those persons, or random one, or no one? This is where we step into a danger zone of, hey, my software actually can kill people. So be careful with identification numbers that might not be unique. I guess the same situation can happen outside of my country. Anyways, enough of this side notes. This is the end of our process. We saved back the database using Spring Data JDBC, very simple application. The tests are running. The tests are green. So what we have to do, we actually want to send some events from here to our second application. And as a good engineer, I would like to start with a test, right? So I have a simple test of my apply for card service. I'm using a Spock framework in here just so that we can see different ways of testing your application. Spock framework is or used to be like jUnit on steroids. I said used to be because, in my humble opinion, with jUnit 5, there are no more steroids anymore when it comes to Spock. We have every feature that we might need. Anyways, we are going to see two frameworks today because, we are full stack engineers, so we use all sorts of frameworks to test everything. I'm kidding, of course. So when someone applies for a card, and the person was born in, let's say, 70s, that means by definition they should get a card. But how I'm going to check whether the event was published? I probably need some sort of an event publisher, right? Let's use it in here as a mock. Which means now I can check, hey, event publisher, I want you to be called. To be more precise, I want your method called publish to be called with a specific argument, which would be card granted event. This is our simple event. As you can see, my card granted event implements a marker interface called event, which has a type of card granted and some data like card number, limit, peso, and when exactly did that happen. Alright, and my favorite technique, which means copy pasting for the second case. In this case, the person who applies for the card was born in 50s. I'm sorry, no card for you, sir or madam. Of course, this test won't pass because we don't do anything with event publisher, but just to make sure we are on the same page, let's see if it's red. It is. Cool. Too few invocations for event publisher. That's expected. So now I'm injecting events publisher to my apply for card service, which means I need to pass it in here. Cool. And finally the implementation part. So in this case I publish new card, application rejected. I'm sorry, maybe next time. Otherwise this should be published. Card granted, I need to pass the number, I need to pass the card limit as well, and my identification number. By the way, there is no implementation of publisher yet, it's just an interface, but we test with mocks and stuff, so it should work. If we go and now publish to RabbitMQ, we have to be careful about the transactional boundaries, like do I publish after the commit? I should do so that I have, for instance, at least once delivery or at most once delivery, depending on my needs. Anyways, I shouldn't be publishing just in here to RabbitMQ, but we are going to talk about that later on at the very end. Let's see if the test passes right now. That's our unit test, right? Even though there's no implementation, it's green. So unit test passes, but probably if I start the application, it would complain that there is no bin of type event publisher, right? I cannot inject anything in here because there is no implementation. Plus, if I do the implementation, I would like to test it somehow, right? The entire part where I actually publish something to my message broker. Because now I test interaction of my application code with my infrastructure code. But I would like to test the infrastructure code itself too. Alright, so maybe we should have some integration test for publishing events. By the way, I'm going to write today many lines of code which might seem very naive, but stay with me for a while. I'm going to write bad code so that at the end of the story we can draw some conclusions, okay? So it's not like I'm writing production code. I'm writing some code that I have seen, unfortunately, in many places that can cause us problems. All right? So let's apply this way of thinking. Hey, I want to test my domain event publisher, which I'm going to implement very soon, via integration test. So let's focus on implementation. I want to implement my interface. I'm going to call it RabbitMQ domain event publisher because I'm going to talk to RabbitMQ. So Spring ecosystem comes with a nice framework which is called Spring Cloud Stream. Spring Cloud Stream, you can use this framework when you want to connect your two Spring Boot based applications via messaging. How to do so? It's very easy. If you go to your POM XML and you specify that you want a dependency to Spring Cloud Stream, you give your framework a hint that you are going to stream using messaging. Plus, if you give the framework another hint, like, hey, I want to stream using Rabbit, the only sane conclusion that the framework can draw out of those two hints is that, hey, the author of this code wants to use messaging with RabbitMQ. And the beauty of Spring Cloud Stream is that if I change it to Kafka, I don't need to change anything in my production code, just the configuration code I need to change, and it would work with Kafka. There are also another binders, like to SQS or any other binder that you might want to implement if you want to use Spring Cloud Stream with any other binder. So that's like an abstraction for messaging. And if you want to use that abstraction, you have to specify somewhere that your application binds to some channels. So you pass @enable binding to definition of your channels. In this case, I have one predefined channel which comes built with the framework, built in with the framework, and it's called output because I'm a producer to one output channel as the application which sends information outside of itself. All right. So if I have this, my definition of channels becomes a bin, which means I can easily inject that bin in here, like this. Which means I can do that. Source.output, please, anytime someone calls this publish, I want to go to my output channel, which in this case binds to RabbitMQ, but there's no information in this code that this binds to RabbitMQ. This is bound by Spring Cloud Stream underneath on your behalf. New generic message, I want to serialize this. So either card application granted, card granted or card application rejected. As simple as that. But you know, maybe you want to pass some metadata like headers, like you used to do in HTTP-based communication. You can do that with messaging too. Like for instance, I can pass some headers. Let's say I'm passing some headers to my message, and I only pass one header which indicates the type of the message, like if it's card application rejected or if it's card granted. Super simple. I need to pass it as the second argument, and that should be fine. So now I have the whole infrastructure code that talks to RabbitMQ thanks to the binder of Spring Cloud Stream. Let's get back to our integration test. But you know what? Now I think that I don't want my integration test that should run locally without any dependency, without having to run external piece of software on my machine. I don't want my integration test to be dependent on RabbitMQ running on my machine. That's insane, right? That's against all good practices regarding testing. Not only unit testing, but also this kind of integration testing when you want to check whether 2 or 3 units of your code glue together correctly. So I might get into a conclusion that I don't want this true RabbitMQ event publisher to be used in my code, in my test. And my conclusion, I'm not saying it's good, let's just stick with that for a while, is maybe I want my whole context of Spring, but without this specific bin of event publisher, which I want to mock for the sake of this test. Let's see what happens. Let's see if I'm able to write any test. Given someone does HTTP post to my application like this, apply for card service, new card application. The person was born in 70s, so the risk checking algorithm should say, hey, you can get a card. In this case, I'm expecting that with good old-fashioned Mockito, I can check whether event publisher was called, and I'm expecting this argument, right? Sounds fine. In this case, I'm expecting card application rejected, whereas the identification number should indicate a person born before 70s. Let's run this test. It shouldn't be that quick as the previous one because, hey, that's an integration test. It bootstraps the whole context within in-memory DB with all of the beans, so it should be longer. As you can see, there's a context. We have a nice banner of Spring. And let's see if the test is green. Hopefully both of them are green. Yeah. So I have a unit test. I have an integration test. I'm not saying I did everything wrong. I did everything fine. But my conclusion might be, hey, I can go to production. But I'm an old-fashioned engineer, you know what? And I like to run my applications locally before pushing that to production. So let's try and run it. The messaging application. That's a super simple Spring Boot app, so it should start pretty quickly without any problems. Oh, what happened in here? The parameter 1 of constructor apply for card service required a bean of type event publisher. Let's see apply for card service. I remember this code. I have event publisher. There is no bean of this type. I just implemented. Oh yeah. So there is no annotation, right? But wait a minute. I have a test for that. I have integration test. Why it doesn't complain? So I'm going to do something really insane right now. I guess nobody does it nowadays. I sometimes do it. I read the documentation. I read the manual. So I am going to go and take a look at what does it mean, mock bean. So any existing single bean of the same type defined in the context, so event publisher, will be replaced by the mock. That's what I expected, right? So what happened? If no existing bean is defined, a new one will be added. All right. So even though I don't have any bean of event publisher because I didn't register anything, if I do mock bean, it's going to register a new bean just for the sake of the test. So I'm not testing anything thanks to this design. Now, it wasn't a great idea of mine, but you know what? It's 9 p.m. in Poland, so I guess I'm going to blame it on that. But honestly speaking, without jokes aside, I want to stress something. So if we have this kind of architecture, the first step, the unit test, it tested only apply for card service in isolation. Like whether it emits some event, probably by the way, the event should have been emitted from the card itself, not from the service, but no architecture is perfect. Anyways, that's a very good test. It fails fast if it needs to fail. It checks whether, depending on the logic, I'm throwing a new event, but doesn't check whether the event actually can go to RabbitMQ. But I wanted to check the second part, so I implemented a new test, integration test, that took into account all of the stuff we have, like the repo, in-memory database, even the controller, like all of the beans, but still we haven't tested domain event publisher, which was our purpose from the very beginning. What I did is I replaced that with mock. So that was very stupid, because I don't check anything more comparing to the first check. The test is longer, it gives me false positives, so I guess I should delete that, right? That's of no use. So how to test actually this code? So the true domain event publisher, the one that we just implemented. So as I said, in this case, with Spring Cloud Stream, underneath it binds to a specific message broker, like Rabbit, maybe Kafka, depending on what you have, depending on what you use. So what would stop me from implementing a new binder? Like, hey, just for the sake of test, I want to bind it to something like blocking queue, maybe, that I can assert on during tests. That sounds like a sane idea, I would say, right? Luckily enough, I don't have to do it on my own because Spring Cloud Stream engineers thought about this. And actually I can write a test that can bind this code, so can actually run this code, and underneath, instead of going to RabbitMQ in test or to Kafka or to any other broker that you might have binder to, it would go to blocking queue, which is in memory, and I can check because it's the same process. Let's see how it look like. What you need to do is you need to auto-wire your message your channel's definition, in this case that source, you have already seen that, and message collector, which is, as you can see, a class that comes from a testing support of Spring Cloud Stream. And I need to do a little bit of setup. This is my representation or simulation of my topic in Kafka or exchange in RabbitMQ. So I'm going to initialize this with, hey, dear message collector, please collect all of the events for channel which one, that one, to this blocking queue. And now I can write this code. I'm going to copy paste as always. So given or when this happens, I expect that on my Rabbit, in this case blocking queue, next event, let's say I'm going to assert headers, that's the quickest way, contains value card granted, right? And the other one contains value, I mean there is a header of with a value equal to card application rejected. If my memory serves me well, I can also double check. Yes, that's the type we are looking for. All right. So this is also integration test, but in this case, if I do this, apply for card, it will go here and here or here, and actually it will go through this code, which I wanted to go through. But not to RabbitMQ, because that would require me to run RabbitMQ in my test, but to my events that I can assert on later on. But enough of talking, let's see if that works. Fingers crossed, because if that's not green, I have no idea where any bug is. Whoops. So stay with me and let's try to fix that. Application failed to start. Oh yeah, the same mistake. Event publisher will be found. Is not found. So you see, this test caught that problem with lacking bean. So it's good. Actually, I forgot about that. But hey, we have test. Actually, we have test exactly for this kind of situations, because I always forget something. So that's good. I'm very glad that happened. Let's fix that. And now we expect green tests. So the previous test didn't catch that behavior. This test, which actually looks for this code, because we don't mock anything, instead of, we mock at the very edge of our application. So the actual infrastructure, not the code that glues together my application with the infrastructure. All right, one of those is green. The other one is not green because I haven't changed the identification number. So I'm expecting card application rejected. Probably I got yes, granted. Let's just see that this actually works. And if that works, there is one thing more I would like you to see. I would like you to see that actually Spring Cloud Stream works. So I have a second app. Let's see if the first one, by the way, now starts. And while it's starting, it's going to look for RabbitMQ connection. By default, as you can see, localhost 5672, just by accident. I'm running RabbitMQ exactly on this port right now on my machine. This is why Spring Boot managed to connect. Of course, on production, you would like to change it from localhost to something else, but this is how it works by default. So let's take a look at the second app, because as you probably still remember, we have a second app on the right side, client notification app, which listens to events. So it's a sync of for some information coming from RabbitMQ. It should be somewhere in here, yes. That's very simple. That's just a simple proof of concept. We have just two classes. In the first one, we enable binding to sync. In this case, that's one input channel, not output, because we listen to one channel, subscribable channel called input. All right. And we have two methods which get invoked anytime there is something on this channel, incoming message. But I want this one to be invoked when this condition is true. So the framework can take a look. Hey, the header is card granted. I should invoke this message. Or if that is true, so it's rejected, then that message. If no one is true, I mean, if no condition is met, then no method would be invoked. But we have just two headers, so it's either this or that. Let's see if that works. So I will run two applications in parallel on my app, on my machine, and in between RabbitMQ. And I'm going to do some HTTP posts to apply for a card with the first application to the first application and see if we see any log statement in the second app. All right, let's try to do that. I'm running the second app. The first one started, as you can see, some time ago. The second one will try to connect to RabbitMQ, the same port default, as you can see. It connected, great. So I have predefined some curl because to be honest, I always forget how to write those. I sometimes use HTTP. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's so much better than curl. Anyways, as you can see, localhost post with this body. This person was born in 40s. So with this header, application JSON, I'm expecting 403 forbidden, no card granted as the result. I got it. Great. Let's try the happy path. A person born in 80s. I am expecting 200 OK. We got it. So I'm expecting right now two log statements, rejected and granted respectively in the second application. Let's see, where is that? Oh, as you can see, rejected and granted, everything works fine, except for the fact that, hey, I wanted to log the client identification number and I got null. The headers are correct, for sure, because this was invoked and this was invoked, but this is null inside. So there is something with serialization, I guess. If you are familiar with default serialization used for Spring MVC, for instance, with JSON, you probably know that there is some configuration you need to use or create or use the defaults when it comes to Jackson framework. The same applies in here. But I have tests, right? So why I didn't check that in the test? So the thing is that in the test, even in the blocking queue, we haven't gone through message serialization. So coming back to our slides, we have tested until the message was published, but not serialized. So I'm actually not testing the RabbitMQ and the right side, I'm just testing the left side. What I can do to check the serialization, for instance, I could use a tool which is called Spring Cloud Contract. Spring Cloud Contract is a great tool for verifying if what you preach in the contract, by you I mean the application, is actually correct. You can use that for messaging, but you can also use that for REST-based API, for HTTP-based APIs. For instance, you could write a contract in Groovy or in YAML, as you can see in here, for the infrastructure. Let's focus on YAML. That's what you write on your own. Only this. Label card rejected. That's the name of the contract. That's what triggers the message to be sent. And that's the message that we expect to be sent to the channel called channel with those headers, with this content type, with this PESEL, with this timestamp, matching these things. You can do much more creative stuff in here, like you can create some more matchers, you can create an assert on the body, and so on and so forth. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the following thing. The only thing you need to do is writing this YAML or Groovy. What Spring Cloud Contract does is it's going to auto-generate. I cannot stress that enough. Auto-generate That's why I'm looking right now at generated test sources. A test for you. You don't need to write anything. As you can see, I have one infrastructure package and I have one infrastructure test with 2 contracts. Now, that's not something I have written on my own. That was generated out of the contract. Let's focus on the card rejection. Let's take a look. Let's compare whether this happens, send rejected. That's some glue code we need to do. So we have some base class, like a configuration with which we start. This is why I need this. Whether you publish, whenever you publish send rejected, thanks to this publisher, which is RabbitMQ event publisher, I expect contract verifier messaging to receive on channel called channel response, which is not null, which has some header equals to this, which has some content type equals to this, which has some client PESEL equals to this and that. That was auto-generated. And this will be running every time you do build during test phases, thanks to Spring Cloud Maven plugin. I can run it on my own too and see that this actually fails because it requires me to go through serialization, and this is not happening because of my lack of Jackson configuration. As you can see, hey, there is no client PESEL, so this failed. This line, exactly what I have seen on production. I mean, production, air quote, right? So 2 applications running on my machine, but now I can spot that during testing. So what's the root cause of that? I can configure Jackson differently, or I can just treat this as a... Actually, it's not an object, right? It's a fact from the past. It shouldn't be mutable, so I can actually do this, I can do getters, whatever I want. And this way, Jackson will be able to parse this, or I can add getter and the same would happen. Let's see now if that fails. Client PESEL should now get serialized easily. But the test still fails. But with the different thing, timestamp. That's expected. Next thing didn't get serialized. And now I can actually test on my own that what I preach as the producer of this message is actually going to be produced to my message broker. And if my tests, all of those, they don't pass, or one of those doesn't pass, my build fails, which means I'm lying in my contract, which means I cannot build my application. But when everything is fine, there are 2 benefits. First, I checked my own API. Second, I can auto-generate stubs from my API, which is proved, which is verified, and I can use this API and stubs on the right side of my application, right? Of my system, sorry. So on the right side, which means client notification app. So now I could test the entire system, like almost end-to-end test, without having to set up the message broker and any other infrastructure. Because on the left side, I'm checking that what I'm preaching is actually true, and on the right side, I can check whether the stub, which was previously verified, so it is true, generates some client notification according to the type of the message that it gets sent to the client notification app. So this is how contract testing would work. It's not for testing the logic, it's about testing the communication and verification of your API, whether we can actually communicate in your distributed system with many small deployment units. All right. Let's see if that works on production. Air quote again, so my machine. Now if I restart with those changes my application, and if I do curl post with those 2, or maybe not those 2, but just one, which implies the rejection, which represents the rejection, I should see something parsed in the consumer application. So that shouldn't be null. This should be null still because I haven't changed anything when it comes to card granted. Let's check that. Clear. So this is acceptance, 200, okay, right? And this is rejection, 403. Cool. As you can see now, I got what I expected. Thanks to the last bit of testing, I'm able to do that. So I'm not saying we should test like with Spring Cloud Stream, with integration test, with unit test, and with Spring Cloud contract. No. Probably we should have as many units test saying, hey, if that happens, I should generate this event, but only some of those that actually check the event that gets published, or the integration, the glue code like this. Because it doesn't make sense to test every event that gets published. It makes sense to test the API, which is your public API. There are like two kinds of events at least. Public events and private events that are not going to be published outside of our application. And those you can easily test with the first step that we have seen. Last but not least, I promise to get back to something. So if you are familiar with add transactional, you probably are. You know that the actual commit, if happens, this happens somewhere in here in the proxy, right? Commit. If there is an exception in between, the transaction gets rolled back. I mean, depending on the settings of your aspect, but that's by default, right? So if you see this thing, like you try to change two different data sources that you cannot connect to one transaction because that's database, that's RabbitMQ, and without distributed transaction, and even with those, there is the software you use, the infrastructure you use might not be ready for distributed transaction, but even if it's ready, it's slower, etc., etc. If we ignore that, you might have a problem. The problem is as follows. Like, let's see that we publish, let's imagine we managed to publish, so we are in here. We publish card granted to everyone outside. Maybe there are some side effects outside, but we failed to commit, and the client actually gets an error instead of card. So we didn't grant the card, but we announced to the whole world that we get the card. So it's pure inconsistency. So some people call it eventual consistency. It's not eventual consistency. It's immediate inconsistency because we lied to the entire world. So how to fix that? Like, depending on what you want to do. Like, if you want to have at least once guarantee, so the event will be published, but might be published several times, you can use, you can save those under one transaction in the database and then periodically send them over. Or if you want to have another guarantee at most once delivery, so fire and forget, try once, and if that fails, then sorry, no events get published. You can just invoke that after the commit. Like, you can synchronize that after the commit actually happens. In the old days, you used to do that like this, register synchronization, right? After commit or something like that. I guess so, yes, after commit. Or you can use transactional event listener or whatever you use. Actually, it doesn't really matter how you do that as long as you think about this. So to sum it up, we have seen several ways of testing your messages that get sent over the wire, or maybe are just private ones inside of your module. We have seen Spring Cloud Stream, and we have seen Spring Cloud Contract. I strongly encourage you to read the manual if you are interested in any of those tools, and if you have any questions regarding this. So this presentation, I'm happy to answer those. The best way to contact me is probably via Twitter at Jakub Pilimon, as you can see in the left bottom corner. And thanks for having me today. Just one more time, I would remind you that that's our weekly show, 12 Pacific time, every Wednesday. If you want to see more of those, go to tanzu.tv, and I am Jakub. See you some other time. Have a great day, great evening, great afternoon, great morning, depending on where you are. Bye bye. Thank you.